Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to Utility Sports, specifically to all my wonderful subscribers and anyone interested in NBA draft content. I feel like this is the best place to be on all of YouTube to check out what the 2022 NBA draft is going to look like. I've spent endless time, countless hours putting together mock drafts, scouting profiles, watching these players, breaking down film, and really evaluating what these guys are going to be at the next level. So I really do hope you guys have been enjoying the content. Seemingly you have. Everything on the channel has been doing so wonderful because of you guys, and as you can see, we have a special edition 2022 NBA mock draft today, and the reason why we'll get into, but this is actually the second NBA mock draft of the week, which is one of the more time intensive videos that I post on the channel. And the reason why I wanted to put more work in this week, more time in this week, is as a special thank you to all of our subscribers, because we just hit 10,000 on the channel and it feels so surreal even saying it. That's the first time I've said it out loud, and it feels incredibly crazy, and I just feel so blessed. So I do want to issue a huge thank you to everyone that is subscribed. And let's keep pushing. Let's keep moving forward. If you guys aren't subscribed to the channel, please consider it today if you do enjoy today's video. Learning more about the 2022 NBA draft, potential prospects that could go where, and certain situations, places that I see as good landing spots. And also go check out our socials. I don't usually shout these out as frequently, but go check us out on Twitter. We do tweet on there quite a bit, specifically about the NBA mostly. I mostly do a lot of the tweeting. And then also go give us a follow on Instagram. We're not super active on there, but it would be awesome if we had more followers, and maybe we would be a little bit more active making posts on the Instagram. And then also go check us out on TikTok. We're sort of active on there as well. So we're trying to get more active in all those areas. Of course, YouTube's been the biggest focus though, and it seems like you guys are just loving the content. So again, a huge thank you. I really, really do mean it from the bottom of my heart how thankful I am that we've hit 10,000 subscribers, because when I started, never thought we'd get there, and now we are. So again, huge thank you. And then let's jump into it. This NBA mock draft is based on standings still. So remember, the lottery comes out on May 17th. If you are looking for a different style mock draft that maybe is a little fresh and different, I do have one on the channel from this week. And it's a fun first overall mock draft. So if you're looking for something fun and fresh and different, go check that one out. It looks at each team that could potentially have the first overall selection and who they would actually take with that pick. And then let's look at this as a mock, not a big board. I have big boards on the channel. Go check out my latest one. This is not a big board. This is not what I would do if I was in the shoes of the GM drafting. This is my projection on what the GM will actually do. And this week, there's a ton of shakeup. The whole top four is different this week. I don't have a single prospect staying the same from this week's mock in comparison to last week's mock, where I went through the whole first round for the top four picks, which is obviously, as you know, very contested and difficult to project. And there's a lot of talent in the top four. So let's get it started off here with Houston, who obviously had the worst record in the NBA this year, a 14% chance to be picking first overall. And this week, I opted for forward/center Chet Holmgren, and I know right now Rockets fans weren't going to be happy, and I understand why. Seemingly every single NBA fan that is really passionate about their team, which that's a credit to you guys, is very scared of Chet Holmgren, and I understand as to why. He's probably the biggest risk out of the top four here because of his frame. You know, he looks like a player that is not going to be very good on ball defensively, specifically against post-ups, but he is the perfect filler defender where he's going to be able to anchor a defense, weak side rim protector. He's going to be so special defensively. I mean, if you've seen this guy hedge a screen, recover to the paint, and swat something off the glass, and then run down in transition and knock down a trail three, I'm telling you, there's no other prospect in the class that's going to be able to do that with consistency like Chet Holmgren does. You know, Jabari Smith, he's the other one I really considered here for Houston. I really went back and forth in my first overall mock for Houston a little bit less than a week ago, and I thought they would take Jabari Smith at that video, but now I have them going Chet Holmgren. And that's how undecided, and I think how divided this class is. There's a lot of different outcomes and possibilities here. And this week I opted for Chet Holmgren in my full first round mock draft for Houston. And I think defensively, he makes a lot of sense. This team gave up the most points in the league. They need to get better on that side of the basketball, on that side of the court. And Chet Holmgren, to me, has the most upside defensively in this year's class. Then we move into pick 2 in Orlando here. At this spot, I had him go with Paolo Banchero last week. But this week, I'm looking at guard Jaden Ivey, and this is the first time I've actually mocked Jaden Ivey to the Orlando Magic throughout this process. And I know this might come as a surprise to some people, but let's really rationalize out why I think this. And again, there's definite reasoning as to why they shouldn't do this. You know, they have Cole Anthony and Jalen Suggs. They took Suggs in the top 5 last year. So do they really want to come back and take another guard? And Jaden Ivey is arguably looked at as a combo guard. I see him as a point guard. Some people see him as a combo guard. Some people outright see him as a shooting guard, which I don't see that at all. I think point guard, potentially combo guard, but more than likely point guard. And I think Jalen Suggs is a nice combo guard. And, you know, Cole Anthony led this team in scoring. So Magic fans and some of the other viewers on the channel might be saying, why Jaden Ivey? Well, when you look at a team and you really, you know, think about what you have on the roster, you have to draft best player available or player that you think is going to be the best long term. And I think Jaden Ivey, there's some serious thought to this here because Orlando's going to get Jonathan Isaac back. They drafted Franz Wagner, who looks awesome. They have Wendell Carter Jr. They do have a very good front court. So for me, the reason why we go with Jaden Ivey here is I just think he would be the best guard on their roster on day one. I think he's better than Jalen Suggs, and I think he's definitely better than Cole Anthony. And then my reasoning here is his upside's also much higher than both of those guys. When Jalen Suggs came out, I kind of likened him to Drew Holiday, which now I'm not even sure if he's going to get there after year one. Drew Holiday, of course, very good two-way guard. And I thought that's what Jalen Suggs could be. Now he's going to have to progress to get there. But for me, Jaden Ivey could be near Ja Morant. And to be honest with you, I think his footwork is maybe further ahead than Ja Morant's when they both came into the league. Now, the one thing about Ivey is his playmaking and facilitating is not nearly as advanced as Morant's was when he entered the league. But for Orlando, they need someone who can just outright score the basketball, and Jaden Ivey's going to be able to do that. He's going to be able to get to the rim whenever he wants to. And hopefully if Orlando can add a little bit more spacing to this team, maybe another shooter onto this roster, I think they could be ready to start competing fairly soon. And I know that sounds hyperbolic, but let's not forget that Markelle Fultz missed a lot of time. And then you also had Jonathan Isaac not play this year. Those are two serious key contributors to this roster that you're essentially adding back full time. And I think Orlando probably could sneak into near the play-in. Now that's going to take a lot of work, and you know Jaden Ivey's going to have a great rookie year to get that done. But Ivey, for me, best player available, and I think Orlando could consider him second overall. Then we move into 3, and the Detroit Pistons are here, and obviously some Pistons fans are going to be sad that Ivey's not available for them, but they're going to go ahead and look at forward Jabari Smith here from Auburn, and this is still an awesome pickup. And it seems like Jabari Smith is seemingly becoming more divisive as well as we go throughout this process. I have comments that I read every single day from you guys. I do read every single comment on the channel. And some people say, whoa, I love Jabari Smith. He's this special Kevin Durant-esque player. Not that I agree with that, but that's what I'm reading from some comments. And then other people say, yeah, I'm not sure if I'm sold on Jabari Smith. He doesn't put the ball on the deck super well. He's a little slight in his own right. You know, and that's been Chet Holmgren's biggest bugaboo. You know, Jabari Smith's not some big, strong physical player either. He's very slight, and that's where he draws some of those Kevin Durant comparisons is because of his frame. So for me, Jabari Smith, I still think he's an uber talented player who I think has immense upside. I just don't think he's as much of a finished product as people are seemingly talking about him as, but there's a good case to saying that his potential could be the highest in his class, just given how tall he is and his perimeter skill set, both offensively and defensively. And I think he'd be a great fit with Detroit next to Cade Cunningham, without a doubt. So for me, Jabari Smith does make a lot of sense here for the Pistons. Then we go to pick 4, and we're looking at Oklahoma City here. And of course, last week it was in an interesting situation where Jaden Ivey fell to them in last week's mock, and I opted to not go with that, even though a lot of people are saying, oh, well, they need to go with best player available. And I do think that is a valid opinion. But they also just need to, find help in their front court. But luckily in this mock, it plays out perfectly for them, where they get best player available who does play in the front court, and that's Paolo Banchero. He's a pretty solid interior defender. I know the knock on him has been his defense, and I think there is going to be certain elements that he struggles with on that end, but he does play with good size and physicality, and he's got pretty good length to him. So I think he can challenge shots around the rim, and he's got a very NBA-ready body with a very NBA-ready skill set. Perhaps you're looking at the rookie of the year here going 4th overall, just because I think he's going to really fit into the NBA well. I think he's further along than Jabari Smith in his actual skill set. I think he's probably more physically ready for the NBA than Chet Holmgren. And I think Jaden Ivey could maybe push him, but I think Ivey's statistical output in year 1 is going to be sort of dependent on situation and kind of the way that he gets utilized. Whereas Banchero, we know he's going to come in and he's going to get buckets. This guy is a half-court creating machine specifically for himself. He's not a bad passer. He's just a reluctant passer. He tends to slow the ball down quite a bit. But if you're looking at Oklahoma City, a team that doesn't have a ton of offensive talent, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Trey Mann, Josh Giddey, those three are very good offensively, and Lou Dort's definitely taken steps forward. But Paolo Banchero would arguably be the best half-court scorer on day one. I don't say that lightly either, because I think Shai is a phenomenal player who's a near all-NBA talent if the Thunder would actually let him play 80 games a year, which he did with the Clippers back in his rookie season. So he's definitely a durable player who just gets shut down early for Oklahoma City. But I think Paolo Banchero could be a really good addition for this Thunder team. And, they have 3 first-round picks, so there's definitely potential here to come back and really address other holes still on this roster, specifically at the center position and another forward spot as well. Then pick 5, we're looking at the Indiana Pacers here. In Indiana, they're into the top 9. That's a lock. They have not picked in the top 9 since 1989, which is a crazy long time. That was before I was born. So Indiana, this is history basically here for me here at Utility Sports, getting to see Indiana pick in the top 9. And I think this is a huge selection for this team. If they move up into the top 4, it would be huge for this franchise. But based on the standings, they're at 5 right now in this mock. And with what's available for them, I have them going with guard/forward Shaedon Sharpe out of Kentucky. Of course, he never played an actual game for Kentucky, but he is now draft eligible based on the way that he exited high school and his birthday. He's barely old enough, just by a couple months, but he's old enough nonetheless to get drafted, which is huge. And now I know a lot of people, there's a lot of steam going for Shaedon Sharpe saying, oh, whoa, and I've had him going 7 to 9 in a lot of my mocks. I have him at 5 here because I do think it is possible. And I think the biggest thing with my mocks is, throughout the process, when I'm recording one mock a week, I am looking at all the possibilities, all the different scenarios that could play out, so we have a better understanding of what the draft could seriously look like as we navigate through this process. And Shaedon Sharpe at 5 is a seriously possible outcome. But I also want to point out that Kobe Bryant went 13th. Kevin Garnett, was not a top 3 pick in his own class. Monta Ellis went in round 2. There's been a lot of high school players that come out of for the draft, specifically when it was legal to come out as a high schooler, and they don't get the love and the credit that they probably deserve, because drafting a high schooler is just a much bigger risk than drafting a college kid, because you don't have the same level of competition that they faced. Think about a player like BJ Boston. Had he been able to come out of high school, would have been a top 5 pick or at least a top 10 pick, ended up going in the second round to the Los Angeles Clippers. Now, Shaedon Sharpe, I'm not saying he was going to follow the same trajectory as BJ Boston by any means. I think Shaedon Sharpe's going to be really, really good. But I do want to point out that this is a multi-million-dollar investment by a GM. And if the GM is not 100% sold on it, this is something that, you would walk into a meeting with ownership and say, hey, I want to take a high school kid who never played a college game. That is a risk. You're really putting yourself and your head on the table essentially for liability here. If you do draft a player like Shaedon Sharpe who never played in college and he doesn't work out, it does not look good on your resume. I'm just going to leave it that way. I still think he's an awesome talent. I think Indiana gets a really great player here who's very athletic and is going to be awesome in transition and gives them an element that I think they're missing with Tyrese Halliburton and Miles Turner as their 2 best players. But ultimately, for me with Indiana, I still think that this is a risk just because we haven't seen him at the collegiate level. Then we move on to 6, Portland here. The Trailblazers picking 6th overall. And this team is in a really interesting spot. Portland fans, I know that the media has been covering you, maybe not as thoroughly as I think they should be, because I think, Mick Cronin set himself up here in a very interesting spot where maybe you can add some serious talent this offseason. They have nearly a max contract slot in free agency that they could use to add a player. They also have Anthony Simons, who's taken a massive step forward. You get Damian Lillard back, and you've got this pick as well to add to the collection of assets you could look to move. Here I have him going with forward Keegan Murray, which I just think makes the most sense. For me, if I'm Portland, I'm hunting for a 3 or 4 that can play at the NBA level. And with this spot, Keegan Murray, 6th overall. I mean, he's going to be very NBA ready. He's awesome on the offensive glass. He's going to be very consistent as an offensive player. Doesn't need to have the ball in his hands consistently to be successful, and is a good positional defender with pretty solid IQ defensively, knows how to rotate well to the right spot on the floor to bring rim protection as a weak side rim protector, and is going to be very good at guarding his own position and very reliable. Now, do I think he's got massive upside and a really massive ceiling? No, not necessarily. but we've seen players like him in the past get drafted very, very high. And I think Keegan Murray, his floor is probably right around 7. And I think 6, if Portland's at 6, it's the most likely landing spot, honestly, for me with Keegan Murray. Then we look at Sacramento picking 7 now. And for the Kings, there's a lot of different things you could consider here. And one thing here is Monty McNair, their GM, has consistently gone best player available at his spot in the draft. He did it with Tyrese Halliburton at 11. He did it with Davion Mitchell this past year. He looks at his board and says, this is the player who I think is the best out of these players, and I'm going to take him regardless of fit, regardless of position. And that's why he took Halliburton and Mitchell when he had De'Aaron Fox already on his roster. Now, maybe this recent trade where he had to kind of reshape everything changes his mindset on that. But here for him, I think he's going to look at AJ Griffin as the best player available because I think he's going to want to get better defensively. Now, I know there are some concerns about Griffin's size. He is only 6'6" as a forward, and you're probably going to have to ask him to play the 4. Although he does have a pretty decent perimeter skill set as a shooter, so maybe he could fit in as a 3 in certain lineups as well. But if you're playing him at the 3, you'd want to have a fairly talented 4-man. Now, maybe Sacramento can get away with this because they do have Harrison Barnes. They also have Domantas Sabonis. So they do have 2 talented players in the front court already. And I think AJ Griffin could fit along those guys fairly well. Harrison Barnes entered the league playing as a 3, and then at times throughout his career has played the 4 afterwards, specifically when he was in Dallas, played a lot of the 4. So I think AJ Griffin, Harrison Barnes, Sabonis, probably enough size and length in the front court to be able to thrive with Griffin theoretically playing the 3, or, Harrison Barnes theoretically playing the 3. I don't mind this for Sacramento, and I do think AJ Griffin's perimeter offensive skill set as a shooter does fit really, really well next to Domantas Sabonis. Then moving on to pick 8, we've got the New Orleans Pelicans here, and I feel like this is one of the hardest teams to mock for throughout the mock draft process because you look at this team and you say, what's their needs? They traded for Jonas Valanciunas. They have also Jackson Hayes, who's that kind of hybrid 4-5, plays a lot at the 4. They also acquired Larry Nance in the deal for CJ McCollum. And then you look at Brandon Ingram, Zion Williamson. Those are 5 really good front court players already. Then you look into the backcourt. They were clearly high in Devontae Graham. Maybe he hasn't worked out quite as well, which is, a possibility here to look at a guard still if you're New Orleans. But then they made a trade for CJ McCollum. They have Jose Alvarado, who theoretically you would think they would like. This roster just has a ton of good players, so there's not really a lot of needs to really identify. I think shooting is a need though, and I'm going with forward/guard Benedict Mathurin here, and pick 8 feels really low to me. I do think he's a top 5 player in this class, specifically because of his athletic profile as a wing shooter. He's very, very dynamic, can get to the rim, flush it on someone's head, but can also knock down the perimeter shot with consistency and range. He's very good with the ball in his hands, which is one of the things that I don't love about this fit into New Orleans. You look at a player here who he at times did take plays off for Arizona, I would say, off the ball. He did not do a lot of movement, wasn't a movement shooter. The play really started when he caught the ball. And if you've been watching New Orleans, they've got a lot of players like that already. Brandon Ingram, better with the ball in his hands. CJ McCollum, capable without it, but better with the ball in his hands. Zion Williamson, I think, just better with the ball in his hands. So how does Benedict Mathurin fit? Part of this here is just asset acquisition with New Orleans. You try and get a player that you can maybe use to trade and upgrade at certain other spots. This doesn't need to be a home run pick here for them in terms of fit. This could be a really good way to maneuver and try and make other future moves as well, which we know David Griffin has been very, very active. He was really close to losing his job and then really bet on himself in some of the moves that he's made. He traded his own first round pick like 2 or 3 times this past year with certain protections on it, giving him flexibility to do so. And I thought they were all really risky moves, but they ended up paying off because New Orleans got into the playoffs without Zion healthy this year, and he probably saved his job. So if he's feeling confident and risky, you go with a player like Benedict Mathurin. It gives you a future asset to play around with and move. I could see this as a realistic trade spot too, to try and get future assets if I'm New Orleans. But ideally, if they keep this pick, they look at a guy like Mathurin at 8. Number 9, San Antonio Spurs here now. And San Antonio, really, really awesome young team. DeJounte Murray took massive steps forward. And I think the one thing here with San Antonio, I've been saying in all my mock drafts, they just need more size, physicality, strength, athleticism. They need the 4 physicals that are really big, specifically in the front court. They've added more skill. They've added more shooting. They've done a lot of the right things. But now to complement that, you have to look at trying to find a player like Jalen Duren, who is a center, At pick 9 from Memphis, and I really, really love this kid. I think he could be the next Bam Adebayo. Now, I think that's a very high ceiling to project, and I don't necessarily know he's going to get there, but if anyone from this class would, I think it could be Duren, specifically with the way that he can move on the perimeter as a big. He's a little bit undersized. He's not a true 7-footer, but he's very athletic, very skilled player as well when it comes to actually catching the ball and making decisions. I think he's someone who you put him in a short roll situation, which is why in San Antonio could be really, really good fit with DeJounte Murray, get him the ball around the free throw line. And I think he could even arguably play next to Jakob Poeltl at certain points. Now, I don't think that's going to be a phenomenal lineup for San Antonio, but I don't think it's a massive negative either, which is an intriguing fit. And then simply when Poeltl's out of the game, you're able to keep a rim protection element, which San Antonio just hasn't had as of late. Now, I know some people are going to say, oh, we have other centers on this roster. I'm telling you, none of them are as good as Duren. So you go best player available here. That's Jalen Duren at 9, and I like it a lot for San Antonio. Then we move on to 10, and we have the Washington Wizards here, and they're one of the more interesting teams at this spot. I think that the hunt for point guard has just been so obvious, though, for Washington. You know, ever since John Wall tore his Achilles, they went through the trade for Russell Westbrook. Could he be the long-term point guard next to Bradley Beal? Sort of worked, sort of didn't. They traded him in a really good deal to the Los Angeles Lakers, and then they came back and signed Spencer Dinwiddie. So they tried again at point guard, and again, it didn't really work. They traded him for Kristaps Porzingis, in which, I think is another really good move for this team. They have a ton of forwards. They've got a ton of length and size, and of course, they still have Bradley Beal. They just need a true point guard. And for me, I'm going to mock them TyTy Washington in this mock draft. And maybe it feels a little early for TyTy Washington to go, specifically since we didn't get to see him much in March because of the upset over Kentucky in round 1. But still, TyTy Washington, and oddly enough, it's going to say Washington on the front and back of his jersey, which is funny. But, you know, ideally here with Washington, what he does well is facilitate an offense and run the pick and roll. And for me, if I'm Washington, I'm looking to run a lot of pick and roll offense this next year with my athletic bigs and also with Kristaps Porzingis. And I'm looking for someone who can get easier shots for Bradley Beal. And it's not like TyTy Washington's going to completely transform this team, but I do think he gives them a consistent starting point guard, which is what they've been searching for. They also made the trade for Aaron Holiday. I forgot to mention that. They've done a ton of different things trying to find the point guard spot. It's been unsuccessful so far. TyTy Washington, though, is a step in the right direction at 10. Then moving on to pick 11, we've got the New York Knicks here. And the Knicks didn't have the season they were hoping for. A lot of stuff went wrong. They were never healthy, but there were some bright spots for sure, specifically with Emmanuel Quickley and Obi Toppin. So how do we fit off of that with RJ Barrett also in mind? And that's going with a 2-guard here in Johnny Davis, who kind of plays a combo guard role, is able to create for himself off the bounce, and is a very skilled mid-range shooter. Now, the play style that he utilizes, specifically as a creation scorer, does lend itself to some inefficient nights, which I know Knicks fans are going to say, oh, we know all about that with the way that the Knicks played this year. But Johnny Davis, to me, I just think it's best player available at this spot if you're New York, and you try and, you know, make some other roster moves to figure everything out. The one thing that I think would be phenomenal here for New York, specifically Tom Thibodeau, in making this selection, Johnny Davis is a very competitive dude, and he's also a very skilled defender. He's got a good frame to him. He's going to play with physicality, and I think he's going to be everything that Evan Fournier was supposed to be for the New York Knicks, which I think is huge here for, you know, Madison Square Garden. I think Johnny Davis is the type of player that could get that arena rocking a little bit. Number 12, Oklahoma City here on the board again. Remember earlier we went with Duke forward Paolo Banchero, and we're going to have a little bit of a Duke theme here, looking at center Mark Williams, who played alongside Paolo Banchero in that front court. And the interesting thing here is you add two players who do already have chemistry together. They actually complement each other fairly well in the post. Mark Williams, an athletic big who can get off the floor, go up and swat a shot into the first row. And Paolo Banchero, maybe not as vertically explosive as Mark Williams, but again, like I said earlier, plays with good strength and physicality at the position. So you have two intriguing bigs that you add into your roster, one who's going to play the 4, one who's going to play the 5, and their skill sets do complement each other. Banchero, a skilled scorer, and Mark Williams is a perfect rim running big in today's league with a good rim protection skill set as well. Very good timing. He's one of the massive risers throughout March Madness. Took a massive step forward this year for Duke, and I think Oklahoma City would have to consider the center position here. Even if that's not the best player available on their board, it is such a massive hole for this team that you need to address it. And I know people are going to say, oh, you don't want to rebuild too soon. For me, part of rebuilding is development. And if you want to develop Josh Giddey and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and you want Paolo Banchero to be successful early, you get players around him that can help him. And Mark Williams is an example of this because he's more NBA ready, I think, than some of the other players available at this spot. And I also think he fits what they need, which is a screen and roll guy. And Mark Williams, I think, is going to be very successful in that role at the NBA level. Then moving on to pick 13, we're looking at the Charlotte Hornets here now at this spot. And for me, after getting beat out of the play-in twice in 2 years in terribly disgusting fashion, Charlotte's got to look for more defense, specifically around LaMelo Ball. And for me, forward Jeremy Sochan here makes a lot of sense. I think we're going to see a Gordon Hayward trade. I'm not exactly sure as to where yet and really what the package is going to look like in that. But I think there's going to be more forward minutes available. And I think Jeremy Sochan is a really versatile forward who can probably play 3 through 5. He could be a really skilled perimeter defender as a 3. Now, I don't see him playing a lot of that because his offensive skill set is rather limited. He probably plays more of the 4 and 5, but I think, in certain lineups, if you want to go defense heavy around LaMelo Ball and say maybe James Bouknight or Terry Rozier, who's a good defender in his own right, but, skilled offensive player as well, you could put a lot of defense on the floor in certain lineups. If Sochan's playing the 3, he's guarded a lot of 5s in his time at Baylor. Now, I don't know if he's going to be able to consistently do that all the time at the NBA level, but I think there's going to be times where we see him play small ball 5, which would be really, really fun. He's a good rebounder, very, very solid as well when it comes to fronting the post, playing behind the post up player. He just is very smart on that end of the floor, and I think Charlotte needs a player like Sochan on that roster. And then we look at 14 here, Cleveland, the Cavaliers now at this spot, and 3 weeks in a row, I'm not switching this mock up for this pick. Ochai Agbaji, if he's here, the Cavs take him. It just makes way too much sense. This is a playoff level team getting a player who's ready to make an impact in the playoffs. Ochai Agbaji, a senior coming out of Kansas. I've evaluated him 3 times because this will be the 3rd time he's declared for the NBA draft. But this time he's actually going to stick in the NBA draft. Before, he was looked at as a 2nd round pick. Massively improved his game, specifically as an off-ball shooter. And also his defensive impact just improved immensely from his sophomore to senior season throughout that time period. He's a way different player than he was 2 years ago. And Cleveland gets a really, really nice wing at this spot, which is one of the most needed spots on this roster for Cleveland. I also have a Cavaliers offseason preview up on the channel, so I'll try and put a card for that here. Make sure to go check it out so you can see my thoughts on a Cavs offseason. Pick 15, Charlotte Hornets back again. Remember, we went with Jeremy Sochan, 13th overall. And at 15, I think Charlotte, again, they're going to be looking for more defense, specifically at the big man position. And Walker Kessler makes a lot of sense here out of Auburn. The reason I didn't go with Walker Kessler at 13 is because I was fairly confident that Cleveland would not take a center at 14. So you kind of get to play yourself into a position where you say, hey, let's take the forward because we feel it's more likely that Cleveland would go forward. And then we can come back and get our center at 15 anyway in Walker Kessler. So a little bit of draft strategy here from Mitch Kupchak, who I think is one of the best GMs in the NBA when it comes to talent evaluation. He does a really good job finding good young players. And Walker Kessler is another example of this, a player who played in UNC for a year. So he's very accustomed to North Carolina. He's going to fit well into Charlotte. And I think he's going to be a nice impact player. Again, with LaMelo Ball on the floor, you need more defense around him. And I think adding more defensive players is going to give lineup flexibility to whoever the new head coach is after the James Borrego firing. And is also going to give them different types of lineups that they can run, which I think is just going to be really, really important for Charlotte. They've been very fast, high-paced, and fun to watch and very explosive athletically. But I think getting a little bit more defensive IQ, defensive positioning mentality, and just better defensive skill sets on the floor is going to be really impactful for Charlotte, taking that next step from a play-in team to an outright playoff team. Then at 16, we got the Atlanta Hawks here now. And it's kind of funny because throughout this mock, I spent a ton of time thinking, what should I mock here? What makes a lot of sense? And for Atlanta, I've always been divided. Do I go backup point guard or do I go defense? And the funny thing with me saying or in between there is I never really considered one of the better defensive point guards in this class who plays with good size, and that's Dyson Daniels. He's a bigger guard, played for the G League Ignite this past year, and was pretty solid. Now, he doesn't have a good 3-point shot, but I think Atlanta is one of the teams that can probably mortgage that a little bit because there is a lot of skill already on the floor when you consider Herter and Bogdanovic, of course, Trae Young. John Collins can step out, knock down the 3-ball with consistency, and then DeAndre Hunter as well can knock it down as well. So this Atlanta team already has a lot of offensive talent. They need a backup guard who can facilitate the offense, which Dyson Daniels is a solid facilitator, and with his size has passing angles available to him that other guards in this class don't. And some would argue a very high upside because of this, because of his size and defensive capabilities. And with that defensive capabilities, he's going to be able to guard 1 through 3, which means you could play him next to Trae Young theoretically. Now, I don't think they will because Atlanta's been one of the heaviest pick and roll offenses in the league since drafting Trae Young, and I don't see that changing. So that means Trae Young's going to have the ball in his hands. But I don't think it's crazy to suggest that Daniels could play alongside Trae Young because of Daniels' defensive capabilities. Offensively, maybe they wouldn't want to do that. And even so, if that's the case, Dyson Daniels still a pretty solid fit into Atlanta anyway, just coming off the bench and being the backup point guard full-time. Pick 17, we're on to Houston here, and I'm looking at forward Tari Eason for the Rockets, specifically because with this team, again, you need more defense. I went with Chet Holmgren, and some have concerns about Holmgren, his physicality. The nice thing I know is Alperen Şengün rebounds the basketball very well. He's a really good box out machine, which is one of the things that just doesn't get talked about enough when you're evaluating a prospect. That's why I like Şengün so much. And Houston is in the middle of building this very talented, skilled, oriented team. But then you just need more physicality and size, specifically if you draft Chet Holmgren. And that's why Tari Eason does make so much sense here, because he's one of the most physically gifted players in this class, very athletic and very, very strong. He's going to make an impact in the NBA, both defensively and offensively, because of his strength, length, and size and athleticism. And sometimes when you're evaluating prospects, it's really easy to overlook those things and say, oh, he's just stronger than those guys at college. Well, Tari Eason's going to be stronger than a lot of guys in the NBA as well. And he's going to be a player that teams don't want to play against, because by the end of the night, you're going to be tired. You're going to say, really, Tari Eason, are you really driving into my chest in the third quarter here of, game 43 of the regular season? And Tari Eason's going to do it and then probably flex on you. I love his intensity. I love his size and physicality. And I think Houston is better with Eason on the roster. And then we move on to 18, and we've got the Chicago Bulls here now. And the Bulls, there's a few things you can look at. You could look at a backup center, which is originally what I planned on for this video, but just given the fact that Kessler and Williams and Chet and Duren are off the board, I just don't see it at this point. So then you could look at a backup forward. And for me, I'm looking at EJ Liddell. And the intriguing thing about Liddell here, for anyone who watched him knows how good of a rim protector he is as a forward. I think the common comparison for him is probably going to be Draymond Green, because he's got some of the similar defensive characteristics as Draymond as a smaller player, not a 7-footer, but he can protect the rim like he is one. And that's going to be valuable for Chicago, because I think maybe they just buy into a small ball lineup when Vucevic is off the floor. And Liddell maybe plays some small ball center in that type of look, and Patrick Williams plays the 4, and you try and go fast hybrid lineup that is going to be tough to deal with. And for me, Liddell does make some sense here. But the other thing about him, his offensive skill set's good enough where he can play the 4 or the 3 even maybe. I don't love the 3. Patrick Williams has really improved his game though, specifically as a passer. He's taken massive strides. I still think there's a lot of room to grow. We saw that in the series against the Bucks, that he does need to take more steps forward, but he hasn't been healthy really to develop as much as he probably should have by this point. So assuming he takes a step forward into next year, maybe Patrick Williams plays a little bit more at the 3. And you do have a really skilled lineup already with LaVine and DeRozan on the floor, and if Vucevic is at the 5. So you can get away with certain things. And there's a lot of different outcomes here for Chicago. They just need more front court help. EJ Liddell, a really good option. Pick 19, we're looking at the Minnesota Timberwolves now. And this team's been very fun and frisky, especially when you consider how well they've played in the playoffs against Memphis. At the time I'm recording this, they are down 3-2 to Memphis. You guys will have a better idea of what that series looks like by the time this video actually debuts. But again, Minnesota's been very fun and really fresh team to watch in the playoffs. And I think here they go big upside. They go with guard Jaden Hardy, which probably isn't the biggest need for this team by any stretch. Malik Beasley's been playing pretty solid off the bench. Anthony Edwards is awesome. D'Lo's really good as well. But for me, Jaden Hardy, kind of like what we talked about earlier, where maybe you find a player who could become a massive trade chip for you and helps you reconstruct this roster by adding more talent in the future. And Jaden Hardy does make a lot of sense in that way. But I also just think Minnesota could use a true bench scorer. They used Jalen Noel in that role this year, and I think Noel is someone who does have an NBA future. I think he's going to be able to stick in the league for quite some time, but Jaden Hardy just has a better skill set to me than Jalen Noel. This is the lowest I've mocked Jaden Hardy all year, and to be honest with you, I feel like this is way too low. I think that he should be a lottery pick still. Just watching him, the eye test, I think is way more important than some of the statistical nuances about him, specifically because he played 12 games in the G League, 12. So if you have one for 8 nights and you shoot 12% in 8% of your games, your numbers are going to be extremely dipped. And let's not forget, he was a 19-year-old playing against pro players for the first time. Players are going to struggle. They just really are. Jonathan Kuminga did not shoot the ball very well for G League Ignite. And Jaden Hardy, in my opinion, took harder shots. So if you think Kuminga is going to be good, I don't see why you would think Hardy's not going to be. Now, I know he's a little bit smaller, but I think he's nearly as vertically explosive, not quite as vertically explosive, but nearly. And I think he's actually quicker with the ball in his hand. So there's some serious upside here with Hardy. He's a shot creator at heart. Maybe you have to work that out of him a little bit. And, you know, maybe for Minnesota, you're looking at yourself and saying, we're going to get better naturally because we're so young. Jaden Hardy doesn't have to play right away. I know that feels like a lost asset, but if you wait on him a little bit, I think there's some long-term serious upside here that Minnesota could really capitalize on if he's available at 19. Pick 20, San Antonio Spurs here now. This pick comes from the Toronto Raptors, and with who they could take at this spot, remember earlier we went with Jalen Duren. I think we go with a skilled forward in Kendall Brown, who's going to offer some pretty good length in his own right. And he's also very athletic off the corner, specifically as someone who can attack closeouts. And I've said in a lot of my mocks, I think he's a really good connecting piece. Now, do I think that he's going to move the needle a ton for a team? No, but if he's your 6th or 7th best player, you're looking at yourself as a pretty good team because he's going to be able to fit a bunch of different play styles. And San Antonio, who has 3 first-round picks this year, they're in a moment where I think they're going to try and really find their identity. And Kendall Brown is someone who's going to be able to bend and mold to whatever identity you ultimately land on, specifically for a team that's so young and talented with up-and-coming stars like DeJounte Murray. You can never have enough connecting pieces like Kendall Brown, specifically on the wing. He's going to be a competitive defender. He's going to be lengthy and annoying for other teams to deal with, and he's just going to make the right play offensively. And for me, getting that at 20, that's a really good steal in this draft. Then 21, we have the Denver Nuggets here. And fans, you guys are about to get a headache because this should be illegal. I have the Denver Nuggets drafting forward Nikola Jovic. So they're going to have Nikola Jokic, the MVP of the league, and they're also going to have forward Nikola Jovic, who probably will never be the MVP of the league. You never really know with Denver's ability to develop and find talent. Tim Connolly is one of the best in the world at that. But what I do know, Nikola Jovic is another very skill set oriented player coming from Serbia at 6'10". He can play the 3 or 4 with his skill set. Really good passer of the basketball, can knock down open jump shots, attacks off the baseline and off the perimeter fairly well. He's not going to flush it home on you, but he's got an array of finishing capabilities, specifically beneath the rim. So I think Jovic, the Nuggets just needed more talent, especially. And the one thing here is it's really tough to get a feel for what the Nuggets really are, because they looked awesome once they acquired Aaron Gordon and they still had Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. They played this whole past year basically without MPJ and without Jamal Murray. So the Nuggets, they just weren't who they're going to be. You add Nikola Jovic here, and all of a sudden, your lineup looks mortifying to other teams. You bring Jovic off the bench, and I think he's going to be a really nice pickup. I could see Jovic going anywhere from even pick 14 to pick 21. It's hard to see him falling below Denver here at this spot. It's just hard to find a specific range for him, especially at this point of the process before the combine, because that's when more, international European players do start to rise up a little bit more. I think that Jovic is probably going to finish in that 14 to 20 range. I'm just not exactly sure where yet. Then we're looking 22, Memphis Grizzlies here, and another player who could be perceived with massive upside. That's guard/forward Ousmane Dieng. And part of why I mock him here to Memphis is they're a team that's going to lose Kyle Anderson more than likely in free agency. And they've also got Tyus Jones, who's going to leave for free agency. So you need to find a backup point guard and also a skilled forward who can take people off the bounce. And luckily, Ousmane Dieng does both of those things. He could be a backup point guard for you with good size at about 6'7", or he could just play a flat out small forward position where he acts as a secondary or tertiary playmaker for your offense and is someone who's comfortable with the ball in his hands. Now, the one issue here, just like with Kyle Anderson, he doesn't shoot the 3-ball super well. So you're going to have to wait on some development from him as a shooter before he becomes super reliable as a player next to Ja Morant. But what I think here is when Ja Morant's out of the game, Ousmane Dieng could be a very valuable pickup for this roster. 23, Brooklyn Nets here. We know how their season ended. This pick, of course, comes from the Philadelphia 76ers in the James Harden trade. And it's really tough to, finish the year with no contribution from Ben Simmons. But at this spot, I think the Brooklyn Nets do need to look for a little bit more length and size and physicality, and that's Malachi Branham. Now, he's not going to be the tallest player in the world by any stretch. He's got decent size to him, but the one thing about him, he's got broad shoulders, he's strong, and he's physical at the wing spot. And this is the one issue with Brooklyn. When you looked at the Goran Dragic, Seth Curry, Kyrie Irving combinations, they're just too small to guard anyone. Boston has a ton of size and length and physicality and strength and good wing play. And Brooklyn, outside of Kevin Durant, doesn't really have great wing play, at least at this point. I think Kessler Edwards is going to be good long-term. And no Ben Simmons really did hurt what this team could be defensively. You get in a player who I think could be a good two-way guard in Malachi Branham. Kind of reminds me of Will Barton, not quite as athletic as the younger Will Barton, but someone who I think could still be impactful at the NBA level. Malachi Branham, a good pickup here for Brooklyn. Pick 24, we got the Milwaukee Bucks now at this spot. And for Milwaukee, I have them going with center Ismael Kamagate. And the reasoning as to why here, Milwaukee clearly just didn't feel good about their long-term backup center position. And specifically with Brook Lopez's back injury, I know he's been playing really well in the playoffs, and I don't have concerns about him in the short term, but long term, I think Milwaukee's going to circle this as a potential area of concern. And they're going to look for a player who can help them. They made the trade for Serge Ibaka to give them a little bit of insurance this year, but I think Ismael Kamagate is a selection to give them long-term insurance behind Brook Lopez. He's a very athletic big who can protect the rim with the best of them. He's very, very adept in that regard as a rim protector. And if he was playing in the American game right now, and by what I mean by that is in college ball or even in G League Ignite, I think he would get a little bit more notoriety because of his athleticism and how well he swats shots at the rim. He had a 9-block game this year in Paris, France. So I think Kamagate could be a very nice pickup here. We saw Rudy Gobert go in the late 20s. Now, I don't think Ismael Kamagate is going to be Rudy Gobert by any stretch. What I see is a little bit more of a Dwight Powell type role for him, but he's a better rim protector than Dwight Powell. Maybe not as skilled offensively quite yet, which some people are going to say, wait, skilled as Dwight Powell, what do you mean? I mean, maybe not as good offensive feel specifically as a role guy quite yet, but I think within 3-4 years, he could definitely get there. And still, again, way better upside defensively than a guy like Dwight Powell, who is a starting big in this league. Then we look at 25, San Antonio Spurs here. Now this pick comes from Boston in the Derek White trade. That trade really helped catapult Boston, but now San Antonio with 3 first-round picks, they gained a lot of flexibility and a better sense of direction for where this franchise is heading long-term. And then remember, they still stepped up their own play, made it into the play-in over the Lakers, which was huge for the development of some of their young guys. And for me here with San Antonio, I'm going with French-born guard Hugo Bassan, who's been playing overseas for New Zealand with the New Zealand Breakers of the NBL. And the last time San Antonio had a French point guard, it worked pretty well. Now, Hugo Bassan, probably a little bit more of a combo guard. He's played a little bit of point guard for the Breakers this past year. And the one thing about him is he's a really good shooter. So the Bryn Forbes trade kind of opened up this role for San Antonio, where you could still see a player like Bassan come off the bench probably for them early behind Primo. Lonnie Walker's headed toward free agency, and the fact that we already drafted Duren and Tari Eason makes me feel a lot better about the front court, that this third pick becomes kind of a luxury draft best player available. And Hugo Bassan for me is that. He's a very intriguing movement shooter. Now, people are going to look up his stats and say, oh, he only shot like 32% from 3. What are you saying? You have to see the difficulty in his attempts, the types of shots he's shooting, the type of way that he moves with the basketball in his hands. Defensively, he's very raw, so you're going to have to do a lot of coaching. Luckily, though, I'm pretty confident Greg Popovich is a pretty good coach. So I think if anyone's going to get the job done, it'll be Pop. And I think the Spurs here are better long-term with Bassan on their roster. 26, my Dallas Mavericks here now. And for anyone who's been watching the Mavericks, they know that the defensive intensity, the attention to detail, the defensive scheme, every little tiny thing for Dallas defensively this year has been night and day different from what it was with Rick Carlisle. The Mavericks are a way better defensive team. And for me, I think Dallas is a team that could continue to go really far in the playoffs, because when you have Luka Doncic and you've got good defensive players around him and a real sense of identity and role definition, the Mavericks could be a very dangerous team this postseason. But when we're looking at them long term, I still think that they could use another guard, because with this playoffs, Jalen Brunson has played himself into maybe a max contract. Now, maybe the Knicks are going to give it to him. Maybe the Detroit Pistons would. There's a lot of teams that would consider giving Brunson a lot of money. I think you could look at Orlando potentially giving him a lot of money. Jamal Mosley, their head coach in Orlando, was someone who coached him in Dallas as an assistant coach. Now, in this mock, I had him draft Jaden Ivey, so probably not. But then you could also look at Indiana, where Rick Carlisle's the head coach. Could he look at a move for Jalen Brunson? I don't think that's the best move, because last year in the playoffs, he actually benched Jalen Brunson to a certain degree. So I don't think Indiana's the most likely landing spot, but I think there's going to be some interest there still. But for me, the Mavericks, I think you have to protect yourself in case Brunson does go elsewhere. And getting a defensive-minded guard here in Kennedy Chandler, who's going to be able to pick up 94 feet, has really quick hands, but more importantly, very quick feet. He's able to beat everyone to the spot that they want to go to. He's going to fight through screens. He can go over the top, underneath. And he's someone who just understands the defensive side of the basketball. He knows what teams are trying to do. He's a very smart player. And toward the end of the year for Tennessee, he's someone who started understanding what his role offensively could be as a drive and kick guard, who I think could, really run a second, off the bench offense. And I think for me, with a second team offense, you need a guard who can do stuff on both ends of the floor. And Kennedy Chandler fits that bill very well. 27, Miami Heat here now. And with the pick here for Miami, there's a few things you could consider, but I looked at guard/forward Bryce McGowens, who at Nebraska did not have a good season as a freshman. But the one thing you can sell yourself on is his upside, specifically with his frame. He's a 6'7" guard who can maybe play a little bit of the three as well. I'd like to see him just play more of the two guard early in his career. And a player I've consistently likened him to throughout this process is Chris Middleton, who was a second-round pick himself. And I think McGowens, with what he can be, you can see kind of the Chris Middleton aspect to his game, where he's a lengthier shooting guard at 6'7", who can knock down the mid-range shot. He's athletic enough to get to the rim and finish, very comfortable with the ball in his hands. And I think, he played for a terrible Nebraska team. Let's be honest about that. You put him into a team like Miami that has a lot of other skilled players around, whether that's Duncan Robinson, who pulls so much gravity as a shooter, or Tyler Hero, who everyone's eyes are going to be on at all times when he's on the court, including the fans. Or even players like Kyle Lowry, Jimmy Butler, who are, the more notable players in terms of their, stardom, what they've been in their careers. McGowan's playing around that type of talent, just going to open the floor for him. No one's going to circle Bryce McGowens on the scouting report his rookie season. But I think early on in his career, he's going to, see massive uptick in production, because he's going to become more efficient just naturally with the better spacing in the league and the way that the game is officiated, especially for players who are a little bit lighter, who, the contact's a little bit more obvious when they get hit. And I think McGowens, who does put pressure on the rim, could have a nice NBA career because of some of those things. 28, Golden State Warriors here now at this spot. And with Kevon Looney heading toward unrestricted free agency, I'm very confident he'll be back. I think the Warriors will try and retain him because of how good he screens. But just to cover their bets, especially with James Wiseman injured, you could look at a big in Trayce Jackson-Davis. I know a lot of people are going to consider him a 4 because he's not the biggest guy in the world, only about 6'9". But to me, he plays center in the NBA. He's not the best shooter. And what I mean by that is he just doesn't shoot the three ball at all. But what he is a player who would perfectly fit Golden State's system. He's a good screener as a big man, very smart and heady, knows when to cut. He could actually run some offense out of the post for him. And I think like the Warriors do with Draymond, if you want to use him as a mid-roll screener, get him the ball around the free throw line, he's smart enough to kick the ball out to an open shooter or toss the ball up for a lob to dunker spot. I think that Trayce Jackson-Davis is going to be very impactful in the NBA. I think a lot of people are really sleeping on him because, yes, he is a junior out of Indiana. Yes, he doesn't have a great perimeter offensive skill set, but not every single player in the NBA has to shoot the three ball. We've seen some really, really good teams get to the next level without a shooting big. And I think Trayce Jackson-Davis, you put him next to the two best shooters of all time, and I think you could make some music there in Golden State. 29, Memphis Grizzlies here now. And for the Grizzlies, after going with Ousmane Dieng at 22, I have them going with Trevor Keels at 29. And part of this here as well is I think with Dillon Brooks, that's the player who I think is going to start getting phased out of their roster down the road here too. He's going to want another good contract when his contract expires. And Memphis is going to look long and hard at themselves and say, okay, well, we think Desmond Bane's better than Dillon Brooks. We kind of like the Zaire Williams kid a lot. Probably want to give him more minutes. We drafted Ousmane Dieng, who's cheaper. We probably are running out of a spot here for Dillon Brooks. And, that's going to be the sad truth of a team like Memphis, who's done such a good job drafting, because they also have to try and keep Brandon Clark, and they've got Jaren Jackson on a contract now, and they're going to have to give John Morant a big extension. So you have to try and find ways to replace guys. And Trevor Keels has a very similar frame to a player like Dillon Brooks, and I think can do some of the same things that Dillon Brooks does. Now, he's not nearly the shot creator that Dillon Brooks is, and Dillon Brooks is the king of the heat check type shot in the NBA, where he's going to shoot a contested 16-footer because he made his last shot. And at times, I think Memphis could be better without Dillon Brooks even, but not defensively. Dillon Brooks is very important defensively for them, and Trevor Keels' frame and his strength, I think, are going to be good replacements long-term for Dillon Brooks. I don't think Keels would play much his rookie season, but I do think going into year two, given Taylor Jenkins' development of this Grizzlies team, every player seemingly gets better year in, year out. Trevor Keels could be really ready by year two of his career to make an impact for a very good playoff team. And then 30, Oklahoma City here. So again, hopefully you guys have enjoyed today's video. I just want to, remind you guys how thankful I am. And then with 30 here, we got Oklahoma City Thunder. Remember, they went with Mark Williams at 12, Paolo Banchero at 4. So 2 Duke players, and we're going to finish off the Duke sweep here. Let's go ahead and get more Duke players into Oklahoma City. And this time it's forward Wendell Moore Jr. When I did this, I obviously knew I was mocking 3 Duke players, but it wasn't just because they went to Duke. I wasn't trying to be fun or funny about it. I just think these are 3 good players that fit what Oklahoma City's probably looking for this draft, where Banchero was best player available as a forward at pick 4. Mark Williams is a really good athletic center at 12. And then Wendell Moore Jr. is someone who's really taken massive steps forward in his junior season for Duke, really, improved as a playmaker. Specifically, that's part of why I think he could be a first-round talent now. But he's also got a good size and frame to him, knows how to cut without the basketball in his hands, and I think could be a nice filler 3 or 4. Would probably come off the bench for Oklahoma City. But again, I talked about the chemistry between Williams and Banchero. Then you add another player who has instant chemistry. I do think Oklahoma City could make noise next year. Now, I'm not saying that they're going to win a playoff series or anything crazy, but I think that they could get into the play-in. I really do. This team, I know they only won 20-ish games this year. They didn't play Josh Giddey the last month and a half of the season. They didn't play Shai Gilgeous-Alexander really the last month and a half of the season. And they had Derek Favors as their starting big man for most of the year. You add this much talent to this team, they're going to be way better. And Oklahoma City makes a lot of noise, I think, going into the future, just given the fact that I'm very high in SGA. I think Banchero is going to be awesome. I think Giddey's great already. I think Dort's good, Moore Jr. is good, and then you add in Mark Williams. It's a very, very talented team already just in that top 6 of their lineup. Again, thank you all so much for watching. Really, really do appreciate everything that you guys have done for the channel. 10,000 subscribers. My mind is blowing. Absolutely crazy. So thank you so much for that. Also, leave a like on the video if you did enjoy. Go check out our socials. Again, that's our Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram, links in the description for those. Would love to have you following us on those platforms. Thanks so much, guys. From the bottom of my heart, really, really do appreciate it. And until next time, we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.